Hello. Israeli authorities say another Palestinian has been shot dead in an attempted stabbing incident. It's the latest attack as violence continues in Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories. The Palestinian allegedly attacked Israeli forces at the Kalandia checkpoint in Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Hebron has also been the scene of violence on Saturday, with a Palestinian taken to hospital after an alleged knife attack there. There were also two incidents a bit earlier on. Meanwhile, in occupied East Jerusalem, a 16-year-old Palestinian was shot dead. The old city has been at the heart of the renewed fighting. Let's begin our coverage with Hoda Abdelhamid. She's live for us now in Ramallah in the West Bank. And Hoda, what do we know about this latest attack at the Kalandia checkpoint in the West Bank?
Well, like it's often the case, there are two stories going around. Now, according to the Israeli authorities, a 23-year-old Palestinian attempted to stab a Israeli border soldier, who at the Kalandia checking in the pedestrian terminal of that checkpoint. The statement goes on by saying that he was first shot and he was laying wounded on the ground. That's when a bomb expert came to check the young man laying on the ground, and at that point the young man would have pulled out another knife and tried to stab again the explosive expert, and at that point he was shot dead. However, there were people in the terminal at the time crossing into Ramallah, and those people say that actually this young man was walking behind an Israeli soldier. Maybe the Israeli soldier panicked or suspected him of wanting to stab the soldier and turn around and shot him. There are pictures that are circulating on social media at the moment, stills. They show the young man bleeding on the ground, but there is no knife next to him. So this is what we know at the moment. And you know, lately it's been the case for every kind of stabbing or alleged stabbing. There are two sides of the story. Each side will believe its own story, and this only raises really the general atmosphere of tension and fear and grief that exists on both sides of the divide.
Hoda, thank you very much. Hoda Abdelhamid, live for us there in Ramallah. Well, in all, 42 Palestinians and 7 Israelis have been killed since violence escalated 2 weeks ago. Mike Hanna has more now about Saturday's developments from occupied East Jerusalem.
One of the Palestinian dead came from this neighborhood and was shot and killed in the adjoining Israeli settlement of East Talpiot. Jabal al-Mukaber is one of the most heavily blockaded parts of occupied East Jerusalem, and the fact that a 16-year-old from there gained easy access to the settlement raises immediate questions about the effectiveness of Israel's closure policy. Questions, too, about the killing in Hebron in the occupied West Bank. This video, taken shortly afterwards, shows a Jewish settler in white clothes still waving his gun. No attempt is made by the soldiers to disarm him, and several residents allege a knife was placed on the body of the Palestinian the settler has just shot. The deep divide between Israeli and Palestinian is reflected in an urgent meeting of the UN Security Council, where the representatives of each side exchanged blame for the crisis. The Israeli Prime Minister is due to meet US Secretary of State John Kerry in Germany on Wednesday and will present Israel's view of events. But in Palestinian eyes, the root cause of the conflict lies in Israel's control of the old city, and in particular the control it exercises over access to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The international calls for leaders to restore calm is essentially dealing with the consequences rather than the cause, and Palestinian leaders insist that the focus of diplomacy should be the core issue. What exactly does Israel mean when it says it intends preserving the status quo of what it calls the Temple Mount, the arrangements by which access is given to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound? Mike Hanna, Al Jazeera, in occupied East Jerusalem.
Well, let's bring in Al Jazeera senior political analyst Marwan Bashara, who is in our Washington, D.C. bureau. Marwan, events today suggest that there hasn't been any slowdown in the violence. What's your view? Could the unrest get worse still before it gets better?
Well, it could get worse and then get worse, even more worser, as they would say in Washington. Simply because it doesn't seem like there's a political solution in the horizon. Certainly the United States did not show any real intention or will to put the sufficient pressure on the Israelis to really go back to a negotiations process that involves freezing their settlements, illegal settlements, I must say, in order to pave the way for a true two-state solution where the Palestinians can live in freedom from occupation. That's certainly not on the agenda. The only thing that the Americans are saying here in Washington is some vague wording about calming the situation over there. So certainly that's not going to contribute to the kind of stability everyone looks for. Now, I'm sure Palestinians will, sooner or later run out of young people ready to die in order to harm an Israeli or go to the streets and face up to an Israeli army. But in the end of the day, the root causes for this thing, which is the occupation, the settlement, and the dispossession, that continues.
What about the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu? How much pressure is he under to bring this violence to an end?
Paradoxically, Mariam, he's not under any real pressure, certainly not from the United States. On the other hand, he is under some serious pressure from the settler community in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. And that's something our viewers around the world perhaps don't know enough about. Today, a good number of the ministers in his government, a good number of his party, and a good number of his parliamentarians in the Knesset, in the Israeli parliament, as well as part of his military units are settlers, perhaps up to 20%. And that is a very high number. So these people, these illegal cowboys in the occupied territories are taking things into their hands, and now they have a huge weight within the political establishment in Israel and are able to influence Prime Minister Netanyahu. He's already a radical politician coming from a revisionist Zionist perspective, but already there are these new Israelis, these new cowboys, new militias in the West Bank that are taking things into their hands, and they have huge political weight in West Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, and hence I think we will see more and more of that, and that's why Prime Minister Netanyahu is taking that kind of even more hawkish than hawkish approach to the situation.
And so does it follow then that what we're seeing now, is it likely to prompt the Israeli government to go beyond conflict management, or does it then just reinforce exactly what these protesters are struggling against?
So we have these two levels of the conversation in Israel. Level number one is you have the likes, for example, of the mayor of Jerusalem, so-called mayor of Jerusalem, Nir Barakat, who's telling Israelis, take out your arms and go armed to the streets, as if it is the new Wild West. He's actually, asking Israelis to take things into their own hands. And we know that a lot of Israelis, if not most Israelis, are armed. Certainly the settlers are, which means that this could lead to a bloodbath in the country. And then there are the other ones who, of course, need to maintain the kind of diplomatic relationship with Western Europe and the United States, because that's where they're getting the help and the trade and the investment and so on and so forth. And those they are trying to show as if they are the victims of the Palestinians, which is kind of pathetic, to be honest with you. And I say pathetic not from an opinionated perspective. I say it's just pathetic for an occupying country, a nuclear power, the most formidable power, military power in the Middle East, to be, to be shouting or crying victim to a bunch of young Palestinians. And yet, Prime Minister Netanyahu is now asking the King of Jordan and the President of Egypt, the so-called President of Egypt, to interfere with the Palestinian Authority in order to stop the escalation. Unfortunately, a lot of that is not working. And as I've seen before, already we've seen that happening already since 1988, Mariam, in the first Intifada, when Defense Minister Rabin asked ordered his lieutenant to break the bones of young Palestinians. 30 years later, they're asking them to shoot at young Palestinians. Well, it seems that neither is helping. So will anyone conclude that more of the same is not helping, and hence it's just crazy It's just crazy to continue to repeat the same things, expecting different results.
All right, Marwan, thank you very much. Al Jazeera senior political analyst from Washington, D.C., Marwan Bashara.
I'm the leading state sponsor of terrorism.